Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Now, Grant, as a labour lawyer yourself, what are the main concerns with regards to the Act as it stands right now?
Well, I think you've summed it up. I think, for me, the one that really stands out is the increase in fines, which no doubt was necessary. One just wonders if it's proportional to the offence that's taken place. And secondly, linked to that, and I think that's the most important one, linked to that is the discretion given to inspectors in terms of assessment of compliance. In essence, there's been a change to Section 42 of the Employment Equity Act, which deals with what a labour inspector should take into account or has to take into account when assessing your levels of compliance. At the moment, it reads must take into account the following factors. Going forward, it's going to read may. Now, inevitably, as most people know, if there's a may, there's inevitably a may not. So there's a discretion given to inspectors as to how they can assess your compliance. It makes it difficult because at the moment, if a client tells me, Grant, you know what, I don't know if I'm non-compliant or not, I don't really take that to heart too much, because if you look at Section 42 and you do a self-assessment, you could easily see if you are compliant or not currently, because it says the labour inspector must take the following into account, and you can plan accordingly. By taking that out, if a client asks me now, Grant, I don't know if I'm compliant, the answer is going to be, well, I don't know if you are either, probably. We can get the basics done, but an inspector will have discretion to take into account the factors that they want to.
Now, in terms of the increased fines, what are we looking at? 50% increase, 100% increase? What are we looking at?
Substantial. It's substantial. At the moment, the first offence fines are 500,000 Rand. Irrespective, it is 500,000 Rand, first offence. Building up to 900,000 Rand is the maximum fine currently applicable. Now, there is definitely a need to increase. Let me start with that point. The example is a company right here in the Western Cape, in the West Coast, who I was about to train chaps on employment equity, and the FD of the company walked in and told me, look, I'm not going to go into comply. Enjoy the rest of your training for the day, in front of the committee members. And he wrote me out checks post-dated to the value of 500, building up to 900,000 Rand. So it's because of individuals like that. And I'd like to think that is the minority portion of the business community. As probably the first chap who's been so flagrant about it. That the majority of chaps are compliant or attempt to be compliant. But it's because of individuals like that one has to increase the fines, there's no doubt. I just think to shift it to 2% of turnover, annual turnover, is excessive. We're linking it to Competition Commission fines, and I don't see the proportion between it. There is a Rand value figure in certain offences, but there again, it's quite substantial. We're looking at more than tripling the fines at the moment.
Do you think that businesses also find a problem with the race, age and gender compliance sector there?
Well, I think in terms of overall compliance, one looks at equity. It's not a intervention. It's a journey. It's something that has to be done properly and sustainably. Mm-hmm. And I think if we do it properly and sustainably, that's how you do it correctly. I think there's been a numbers game being played by a lot of companies in South Africa, which has led to problems on either side of the coin. And the problems, it'd be too long to debate these on the current platform, but inevitably, when you look at the current representation at top management level in South Africa, we are far from representing the demographic of our country. And the sad thing is, as much as I can say that sustainable development, let's train guys up at the next level so that when a vacancy becomes available, we can shift guys up the train and do succession planning proper, that the guys can succeed in positions and we recruit the right talent alternatively into those positions. But at senior management level, the last Employment Equity Conditions Commission report indicated that the training that's been done at the next level, which is senior management, is predominantly trained at white males. If we continue along this trend, our profile would be pretty much the same 10 years from now, and we'd be having the same conversation. So there is a need to change. I think there is definitely, with a lot of the businesses I'm involved with or have consulted with or spoken to, there's an appetite for change. And I think also the guys that do buy in, business as a whole buys into the principle of transformation.
But having said that,
it's just about getting everyone on board with that. Yeah.
But having said that, do you think though that the problem of employing people based on their skin and colour and gender without having proper qualifications will persist though?
One hopes not. It's a practice that came in, I refer to it as a numbers game. There are a number of talented individuals out there. It's about giving them opportunities. It's about hiring chaps with the right qualifications, the right abilities, everything. Where guys say we can't find the right talent, the question I ask them is, what have you done to develop that talent going forward? It might not be that you'll be able to develop that talent in a year, but are you engaging in a corporate social investment program, for instance, in BEE, where you're creating academies for chaps? If there's a problem at a particular level where the qualification is a rare skill in South Africa, let's train maths and science at the standard 9 and matric level. Let's get the guys into bursaries to varsities, and then from there, we get the graduates into the system with work-back clauses. So there's a lot of innovative ways one can look at getting guys into the system, and there's a number of talented chaps out there, no doubt. I look at my tight circle of really good friends, and there's a mixture of races that are professionals in the medical, legal, psychological, social work fields and scientific fields. And that's just my close circle of mates. And I can't imagine that South Africa has this dearth of talent outside of my close circle, as an example.
Looking at this amended Section 42, what are some of the changes you think will be problematic and can lead to litigation here?
Well, with Section 42, inevitably, you're giving a chap, unfortunately, the department has already indicated in Parliament and on record that they are under-resourced. The amendment of Section 42, publicly the department has indicated that they're doing that because they lost the Comair case. They tried to enforce against a big business player, and again, that's where the word must comes in. The Labour Court kicked the case out because the department inspector didn't take into account the financial circumstances of the organisation and also how the rest of the industry is doing. So inevitably, the case was dismissed. Now, because they lost the case, and it was an open acknowledgement, it's on record, they're changing the rules to allow for May, to allow a discretion because of the under-resourcing, because of the fact, inevitably, there's been a parliamentary admission they need to be paid more. There's an admission of a number of, or if you look at the percentage of inspectors who are qualified to do that job, unfortunately, we're looking at the teens, if I remember correctly, in terms of record. I speak under correction in that one. So what the concern is you have that situation of chaps who are under-resourced, underpaid, don't necessarily all in. There's some brilliant inspectors in this country, please don't get me wrong, but there's some chaps aren't at the right level to enforce, and they're going to enforce against the company. They're given discretion. I may or may not take it to court. The question just comes in, aren't we opening up the door for possible corruption in South Africa when you get to that point? I can take you, I can't take you. I have absolute discretion. I'm a little bit concerned with the corruption, and also, inevitably, we're going to see a lot more cases easily entering the Labour Court forum, and inevitably, we already have a Labour Court that's under pressure from a case law perspective and a case load, so I suspect there's going to be a number of cases, particularly after this effective date. I suspect there's going to be a flurry of enforcement and a flurry of Labour Court cases going forward, and that's never good. I think as a country, even though I'm a litigation attorney, I would prefer business and labour to rather be focusing on growing constructively and instead of sitting in court. There's only one winner in litigation, that's myself and the other attorney on the other side, unfortunately.
Now, do you think, Grant, though, that most workers are aware of these changes to Section 42? And do you think that they've been properly consulted, which is one of the main stakeholders in this case?
I think, I think in terms of the Employment Equity Act as a whole, it's been a long process. I myself have been involved in it probably for the last 4 years or so, and my CEO, Johnny, has been involved, I think, for 5, 6 years, approximately, I'm guessing at a time period now. And that's been through the NEDLAC process over and over again, through the public consultation process, consultations with stakeholders, etc. So there's no doubt that there's awareness, and also that at the moment there's also an employment equity roadshow taking place by the Department of Labour. So there's definitely awareness. I think the time frames, what sort of I wouldn't say, well, I suppose shocked is too strong a word, but it is surprising that Friday afternoon, this past Friday, it gets gazetted. It's been up for gazetting for quite some time. The actual act was gazetted in January, but the effective date was gazetted Friday, and the effective date being this coming Friday. And one would have probably expected a little bit of a sort of time frame between gazetting of the effective date and the actual effective date. And I think that's where a lot of concern has come in from a number of stakeholders. But it's been through the public consultation process. Inevitably, there's areas of disagreement. I think I've illustrated the concerns, and also in your opening, you've highlighted a lot of the concerns that a number of stakeholders have with regards to this. It's legislation. There's no such thing as perfect legislation, is there?
So implementation is going to happen this coming Friday. Is there still is the department still open for changes and discussions on the issue?
No, it's done. Pretty much the only thing that's outstanding currently, which is quite interesting, is the fact that the employment equity regulations are currently outstanding. And in essence, the employment equity regulations are the mechanism in which the operation takes place. So in the original draft regulations, there was a strong push for national demographics. In other words, representation, particularly at top and senior management levels, to represent the demographics, the profile of the country. And if one looks at Limpopo province as an example, or the Western Cape right here, the African population in the Limpopo province is sitting at 90-odd%, and the coloured population in Cape Town is sitting at 51%, somewhere around there. And if you do that versus the demographic of South African populations in 74 plus minus somewhere in that region percent, whereas the coloured population is sitting at somewhere around 10 versus 51. So you understand that there was a big debate around the regional demographics. There was case law recently that came out which also spoke to the fact that there needs to be a consideration of both national and regional. But inevitably, particularly those two provinces stand out for me. Yeah. KZN always obviously has a higher Indian population, but the difference between the national and the regional demographic is not as substantial as those earlier two provinces I've mentioned. So I think once the regulations are in play, that gives the framework, the documentation, the forms you need to fill in and all that. So we have an act currently out without the regulations, because the regulations were revisited. The indications are those regulations could come out next week. I have been reliably informed that they'll be out during the course of the next week or so, give or take a couple of days. And also, there's a strong indication, again, there's no absolute confirmation, but there's a strong indication that we were looking at regional demographics rather than national demographics, which I think is a step in the right direction if we look at our population, how it's distributed. Well, that's my personal viewpoint.
I would think that would be great news for some companies. But what's your advice now to companies out there, Mark?
At the end of the day, I think the most important thing is ensure compliance. And the only way you can ensure compliance is if you see it from a total transformative perspective. I don't necessarily, when I do consultations, see employment equity, BEE, and skills development as whilst they are separate acts, they're separate compliance issues. I think if you see everything as a whole and you see it as part of your bigger business strategy and you link the two, then you can be successful. So my advice is, do a self-assessment, or if necessary, approach consultants who are very close to the process, who understand the Act very well, and scrutinise who you're going to use there. Have them do an assessment of you, or do a self-assessment, as I indicated, and really be honest with yourself and be objective and see where you are at. And if you are non-compliant, make certain you get up to basic speed in terms of the compliance, but then sit down long and hard and strategize with your business strategy as to how you can incorporate transformation in a way that drives your business strategy going forward as well. Only when you do that will you really succeed, and will you be fully compliant without even trying. I must be honest with you, I think if you're going to do a tick box mentality, you'll never be compliant.
Grant, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
That was Grant Wilkinson from our Cape Town studio. He's a labour analyst chatting to you about the amendment of Section 42. Now, that's very important. Take care if you're a business. Make sure that you know what you're doing.